Tomorrow is a heavy anniversary, and it bears a heavy question. It's one that we each have to wrestle with, but people with large platforms act as good mirrors for the salient ethics. It's a question of when and how to use our voices today, especially as people and creators whose work and platforms seem to have nothing to do with geopolitics. A lot of people think that this question is easy, and I disagree. I understand the tension. I understand the arguments for staying in our lanes. This channel is built on addressing the wounds of masculinity, and there are good arguments for staying purely in that lane. They sound a little like this. My work will have far broader impact if I never mention anything political, because more people from all over the political spectrum will be able to hear me. They'll stick around for the masculinity stuff, even if it's challenging, but if I get into politics, then they'll write off everything I have to say and ignore me. Better the slow growth that I can facilitate over time than burning whatever influence I have in one performative flash. There's also arguments for staying in our lanes which are a lot simpler, like people just need to laugh a little or see cute baby animals or beautiful paint colors, even in a broken and breaking world. Maybe especially in a breaking world, not everything needs to be political. It's hard to describe how deeply I understand those arguments. I'm a teacher, and good teachers understand scaffolding as pedagogy, which means we live in the mud of the real world with real people. A teacher who simply yells their conclusions in a way that alienates their students and makes it harder for them to see the pathways towards those conclusions is bad at their job and harming kids. So I despise performative failure for the sake of ethical purity. We're here to grow and playing to win, not to keep our hands clean. In this case, keeping our hands clean doesn't mean avoiding politics. It means speaking about them in a way that we think excuses us or lets us sleep better, even as we distance the people who need to hear it the most. So there is a part of me today that judges myself for my transparency around global affairs and thinks that I would have broader impact if I only spoke about masculinities. Another large point on this argument is that if you follow the work of healing masculinity far enough, you inevitably get to resisting empire, colonization, and capitalism. But if you jump ahead on that trajectory, it makes it far more likely that people earlier on will jump ship altogether and run back to Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson. So it starts to look like performative failure that causes far more harm than good. Understanding these valid arguments as well as I do, why would I break out of my lane and speak about things that I have no training or formal qualifications for? I'll try and explain. I invite you, if you can, to imagine a world where unhinged armed people roamed the halls of our schools, causing unimaginable harm. Where students the country over had to learn to hide behind desks and barricade doors. Imagine that climate change has reached such apocalyptic levels that it's impacting a huge percentage of U.S. and global citizens as we speak, where U.S. taxes, weapons, and troops young people from our communities are currently being deployed to support imperialist G-side. Where in the U.S., fascism was being openly celebrated and police in full combat gear, no names or badge numbers, roamed the streets with literal tanks and drones enforcing fascist laws. I know that we all know intellectually that these things are already happening. There's footage burned into our eyes of each of these events many times over, but I'm asking you to take it a step further. Imagine that all these things are happening simultaneously in your community. Houses underwater from climate change. Fascist police forces screaming at you to get inside as they aim for your children and drive by with their tanks. Your neighbors or your neighbors' kids being sent to support the G-side. Your kids cowering and biting their tongues as they try not to scream as shots ring out in the elementary school. In that world, what would you think of a mental health creator who came on screen day after day with an air of being healthy and stable and shared little perspectives and tips for mental health without ever mentioning the fact that everyone's houses were underwater? Fascists are marching in the streets. All the kids are in lockdown while parents clutched their phones to see whether their world still exists. To me, past a certain point, keeping a channel pure, especially around mental health, would start to look like it was actively supportive of the empire that it was consistently failing to mention. I have serious issues with the Hunger Games, and there's a real irony to using them for this example, but one thing Collins got right was the representation of the media. It's easy to picture the Capitol promoting wise-sounding mental health gurus who talk about how to work on yourself and feel better and never mention the circumstances. It's easy to see how any channel or creator who doesn't speak about the G-side or the rise of fascism or climate change is, in reality, supporting the capital. Whether those creators are making content about splitting wood or mental health or threading lashes doesn't matter. Their silence contributes to the normalization of what's happening. I'm not saying every piece of content we post has to be about these things. I'm saying that if we don't use our platforms and voices, loud and regular, to denounce these things, then we're complicit. My channel would be so much larger if I was silent. My videos would do better, I would make more money, I would have greater reach. Videos like this, harm my channel. My public opposition to G-side costs me, but it costs me nowhere near as much as my complicity would. I'm in integrity with my ethics. Even when I flash back to those first arguments and think, I could have kept more followers who support G-side and lean towards fascism if I'd just focused on masculinities, and maybe I could have helped them grow. There's a point against that, and it's not the one that I see a lot of folks make. The common argument that I see against that, on the internet especially, is basically, fuck those people. I hate that. Like I said, I'm playing to win, so no, those people are my family and neighbors. I care about them, and I care about their victims and the future of the planet. There is no those people, in the sense that no one is separate from us or our world. So the argument against silence is not those people. It's that an ever-increasing number of people can feel, some clearly and some just an inkling, how wrong everything that's happening is. And leaving those people to think that they're alone in feeling that by not naming how correct that feeling is amounts to gaslighting. And I don't just mean nebulous vagaries like there's a lot wrong in the world today. I mean pointing out the very specific problems that we're facing. It is colonial capitalism which is driving G-side, climate change, racism, misogyny, fascism, and everything else that we're facing. Actual support for people's mental health means naming this, so that we are not gaslighting them into thinking that they're the failure for struggling today. If we wouldn't exclusively emphasize individual mental health practices to someone in a burning building, let's not do it now, as the colonial corporate capitalist wildfires spread faster and faster. Beyond this, there's an element of integrity that the world asks us to practice today, which involves transparency. I really appreciate it when people with large platforms practice transparency. It builds my trust for them. Dr. Gabor Mate has been someone I've respected deeply and learned a great deal from for decades. He is crystal clear about these problems, including powerful transparency about how outraged and heartbroken he is about what the U.S. is funding in the Middle East today. This lets me trust and respect him more. If he were silent, I would have to wonder, do you see the crimes against humanity that are happening? If so, how can you stay silent? Do you support them? His transparency makes me value his work all the more and listen to him more closely. The other psych professional I've learned the most from for a long time is Dr. Esther Perel, who I've also loved for decades, and I have lost respect for her because of her pseudo-balanced centrism at this time. The only things she's said about this are things like, it feels virtually impossible to hold more than one truth, but it's what I feel compelled to do, and what matters is that you show that you care. I understand how phrases like that can appear balanced. That's what we're taught balance and respect for both sides sounds like. And as I read those apparently wise and neutral words balancing multiple truths in such a hard conversation, the words of the brilliant Jewish scholar and activist Norman Finkelstein come to mind when he says, I don't respect that anymore. If you had any heart in you, you'd be crying for the Palestinians. Perel's superior neutrality is a particular brand of patronization that took me a long time to learn to spot, so I'm trying to help you see it. She's implying, through tone and context, that her brilliant mind is able to see more broadly than our petty little emotional responses, however compassionately she condescends to understand our emotions. But here's the thing. Gabor Mate's right, and Perel is wrong. All three of those people, Mate, Perel, and Finkelstein, are Jewish people who personally suffered under the Holocaust. Two of them, Mate and Finkelstein, are taking those experiences and applying their ethics to the real world today. One, Perel, is pretending to be above it, in the middle, like some neutral party who can hold multiple truths in a way that the rest of us can't. It's insulting. Like so many others, she's pretending to be morally and intellectually superior in a way that actually reveals her lack of morals and lack of courage. Neutrality in the face of unspeakable human rights violations is not superior in any way. And I've lost respect for her over this. I don't mean that in some purity or cancel culture way. I mean that it reveals that she's not as healthy as I thought she was, and that informs how I experience her work. Her patronizing centrism is violence. I hope she can learn that, as Howard Zinn said, you can't be neutral on a moving train. Gabor Mate learned this. He used to be deeply pro-blue and white, but he healed and grew, and now he uses the full force of his large platform to advocate for the victims of the blue and white and denounces colonial capitalism as the root cause. If Esther Perel or anyone else is looking for healthy role models, Gabor Mate is standing right there. Transparency helps on another front as well. My feelings on Dr. Jordan B. Peterson are no secret. He validates and celebrates the worst of men's wounds and globalizes them as though they're natural and strengths, and encourages men to embody and perpetrate their worst wounds. To wounded men, which is all men, his ideologies are dangerously alluring and antithetical to healing. For the last year, he's been very clear about his passionate support for this G-side. Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Many people can see you more clearly now, and that's very helpful. I hope that everyone who supports these unspeakable crimes against humanity is as transparent about it as you are, Dr. Peterson, so that we can all know what evil sounds like in the world today and better understand our enemies. Finally, there's this. Social media has strong strengths and weaknesses, and one of the giant weaknesses that we've all been talking about and making fun of since the early days is that it lets people hide their shadows and present only the most beautiful aspects of their lives. Practicing transparency about the horrors of the world today helps break out of that a little. I still feel what I said in my posts from last October about this. I don't know how to walk in the world today. I don't know what ethical action looks like. I'm kind of a mess. I can only say that with holistic honesty because I'm transparent about how much what's happening impacts me. It's not just that I'm a mess because I'm human. I'm a mess because of colonial, corporate, racist, patriarchal capitalism. That's what's impacting my mental health. Being a human isn't rough. Living through this is rough. Sobbing on the ground in front of my house at the exact moment that Marcellus Williams' life was being taken from him because I didn't know what else to do. That was rough. Watching my tax dollars bury families under the rubble of their homes day after day for the last year, while all my representatives cheer and hand the perpetrators more and more money and weapons, that's rough. My wife and I start every day with a check-in over coffee where we name what we're grateful for, what's impacting us, and what we're looking forward to. And every day, I'm like, the rise of fascism, climate change, and the G-side are impacting me. For months at first, it felt weird to name those same things every morning, and now it feels honest. How the hell am I going to come on here and talk about what I think healing masculinity looks like or what I think is working in my marriage without naming these things that are impacting me to my community on here? Somebody in my comments the other day was like, "You've been looking a little rough, man. Hope you're doing okay." I didn't know what to say. Anyone healthy today is unwell, and anyone who is totally fine today is unhealthy. I'm not any more at risk than we all are these days, but I'm emphatically not okay. Like, are you? As structural systemic traumas shake the entire world? This is why creators who I've learned a lot from on here, but have never spoken about this, concern me today. Like, are you lying for social media, or are you actually this unaffected by what's happening? Either one is a red flag and amounts to gaslighting of your audience. And the fact that you don't see that is pretty problematic. I know that none of us would try and make polite conversation or content as usual for someone in a burning building. We'd acknowledge the reality and try to help. So the question at the heart of this video is this: where's the line for you? Especially if you're a mental health creator or tangentially related to that field, where's the line? I respect the arguments I started with about retaining audiences for slower growth, but for the reasons I've outlined here, somewhere there's a line where that becomes complicity and self-excusal. One of the often silent motivators for that position is the insidious desire to avoid conflict, to protect our peace, to not want to get into drama. The victims and survivors of what's happening today, the children under the rubble of our government's bombs right now, don't have that luxury. So every degree to which we use that luxury is a privilege. And when we lean on those arguments to excuse ourselves, we're using our privilege in support of the crimes against humanity and nature that others have no choice but to face. So where is the line beyond which you must speak? The collective and individual bravery of millions of others, from Dr. Mate to Residente to Macklemore, to everyone you've heard speak about this, has made it easier. They've paved a path for you. It's no longer a radical or an extreme position. It's the position of the vast majority of the world and the strong majority of U.S. citizens. If you're afraid of losing a position or platform because of acting with integrity, consider this. Whatever part of your platform or position your integrity would cost you is currently built on a lack of integrity. Do you want a platform built on a lack of integrity, on a lack of honor? You cannot find a platform or position built on integrity until you practice integrity, and I promise your life will only be better when you stand against these atrocities and with humanity. I didn't say it would be easier. It might not be, but it will absolutely be better. Speaking truth this way is not binary. It's a practice, not a box to check. This means that it's emergent and cumulative. I was at a march yesterday, and I felt so much more comfortable and practiced and relaxed there than I did a year ago. I knew the route we'd take. I knew how to pace my energy so I could show up all the way through. I knew how to resource myself and my community. All speaking is like this. If you never open your mouth because it's uncomfortable and you're not confident, you'll never grow comfortable or confident. As a teacher, I'm fully aware of how caustic purity culture and performative allyship are to learning. Especially in situations like this, public shame is not a good teacher or tool. There are creators who I really appreciate on here who have never spoken about any of this, and notice that I'm not calling them out personally, and I don't think you should either. If you want to send this video to folks as food for thought, great. But I'm asking you not to weaponize it. That would be the opposite of effective strategy and antithetical to the world we're working to create. Like I started with, people with large platforms provide valuable mirrors for this question. But if what I said about Dr. Mate and Dr. Perel made sense, remember that it applies just as much to all of us, regardless of how large our platforms are. It's been a year, and while awareness and resistance have been growing in incredible ways, the brutal colonization is gearing up as well. Tim Walz just stood up and said on national television that the expansion of the blue and white and its proxies is an absolute necessity for the U.S. This G-side is accelerating, and Harris, Walz, Trump, and Vance are all unflinchingly committed to engaging in full-blown regional war. U.S. troops are already on the ground supporting the blue and white, and if you read between the lines of the Pentagon's rhetoric, they are telling us that we are going to war. So each of us must consider how and when to use our voice, and remember that at any time we can, like Dr. Mate, like myself, like so many of us, change our position and start to work for a better world. Free dog. Go, free dog. Go ahead.